5 Saudi Arabian students studying in Oregon have disappeared while facing criminal charges in the United States. But an investigation launched by the Oregonian newspaper has discovered these cases are not unique to that state. Similar cases have also been reported in 7 other states and Canada. The Saudi nationals vanished either before their trials or before completing their sentences. Dixon Kavanaugh has been reporting on these cases. He joins me now from Portland, Oregon. Shane, thanks so much for being with us. Based on your reporting, how long has this been going on, and do you expect to find more cases like these?
Well, thanks for having me on your show. Our reporting in the last few months have found these types of cases going back at least 30 years in the United States. We have some going back as far as 1988 and some as recently as last spring.
And which cases have stood out to you the most in your investigation? Can you paint us a picture of some of these?
Well, our investigation has looked at cases in Oregon and around the country where university students from Saudi Arabia have been accused of fairly serious crimes, from rape to vehicular manslaughter. And in these instances, the defendants have disappeared while facing prosecution. So there's been a handful that we've found here in Oregon, and they all kind of stand out for, different reasons.
And, it's tough to generalize, but do these Saudi students in general come from wealthy families? Are they somehow very connected back in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to sort of determine what the background of some of these students are. But from our reporting, we've been able to determine that not everybody who's received help from the Saudi government when they find themselves in trouble here in the U.S. come from a particularly prominent or well-connected family. One of the cases we've looked a lot at is one in Portland involving a defendant, Abdul Rahman Nura, who was accused in the hit-and-run death of a teenage girl here in Portland. And he came from a middle-class family in Saudi Arabia, raised by a single mother. And, the federal law enforcement believed that the Saudi government, beyond paying his bail to get him out of jail, helped spirit him out of the country 2 weeks before his trial.
And so there's no trace then of these students. They just, like you say, they're spirited away. So it's assuming that they've left the country?
In some of these cases that we've looked into, we have been able to confirm, or at least have been told, that the student has returned to Saudi Arabia. But in a number of these cases, the precise whereabouts of these defendants are unknown still at this time.
And so do you know how those students were able to cross borders, essentially, and get out of the United States? And what role, if any, is the Saudi Arabian government playing in these disappearances?
Again, great question, and one we're trying to seek the answer to. We do know that in many of these cases, the Saudi government has provided substantial sums of money to bail these defendants out of jail and then provide legal counsel for them. And then, in addition, in some of these cases, federal law enforcement or prosecutors have evidence and believe that the Saudi government went a step further to help these defendants leave the country. And I mentioned the case of Abdul Rahman Nura earlier. In that case, federal law enforcement believed that the Saudi government likely provided an illicit passport for Nura and possibly helped him leave the U.S. on a private plane.
So essentially, the Saudi government, the law enforcement there, believes Saudi government is breaking the law, is breaking U.S. immigration laws, as well as criminal
Right. I mean, if it's found that the Saudi government has helped any of these defendants leave the U.S. before trial, they'd be subverting the criminal justice system here, violating U.S. law, and, quite possibly international law as well.
And there's no indication that they would be doing this with a sort of backhanded blessing from someone in the U.S. government, is there?
Well, again, another great question, and I keep bringing up the fact that, we have a lot of questions and very few answers. For the last 6 weeks, we've been trying to get any response whatsoever from the Trump administration and have not been successful in doing so. And I'll also say that Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley here in Oregon have also been trying to seek answers from folks in Washington. And to date, they haven't been that successful either.
So the FBI has not responded to the senator's request for information yet?
Yeah, so about 2 weeks ago, Senator Wyden asked FBI Director Chris Wray for them to look into some of these cases here in Oregon and other parts of the country. And my understanding is that the FBI is currently working on getting responses prepared to send back to Senator Wyden's office. But at this time, they do not know what answers they're going to get.
And some of these cases that you've been looking into go as far back as the 1980s. Do you have a sort of rough number of Saudi Arabian students who may have been, escaping justice here in the U.S.?
I think a lot of people in our newsroom, myself included, believe that sort of the 17 cases that we've been able to document so far, and we have other ones we're looking into right now, very well might just represent the tip of the iceberg here. Again, it's been sort of a piecemeal process, putting these cases together, following up on any sort of leads or tips that we receive. And the more we get the story out there, the more we hear from other people around the country who tell us that this has happened in their home state or their community as well.
And so the most severe crimes, as you mentioned, were rape, hit and run, deaths, anything else approximating the level of those crimes?
Right. Well, one of the interesting things that we've found in the 17 cases we've looked at here in the U.S. and in Canada, that 75% of them happen to be of a sex crime nature. So that's rape, sexual assault involving both women and, in some cases, children. We're looking at 2 manslaughter cases and, one incident that involved a defendant who was caught with a really sort of astonishing trove of child pornography on his computer.
Amazing. And how close are we, do you think, or you, since you are doing the digging and the reporting, to locating these Saudi Arabian students? And once they are located, is there any chance they could be extradited back to the U.S. and finally, go to trial?
Right. Well, so as I mentioned earlier, we know or have been told, and when I say we, the federal law enforcement in the U.S. has learned or been told that a number of these defendants are, in fact, back in Saudi Arabia right now. The problem is that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, despite having a longstanding partnership and allyship, do not share an extradition treaty, which means that defendants who do escape or end up back in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian government, as a policy, will not turn those defendants back over to the U.S. Having said that, there are, ways, diplomatic, political, and otherwise, that could eventually, perhaps, get some of these defendants back to the U.S. to stand trial.
Well, it certainly looks as if this diplomatic loophole is being exploited. So I would imagine that, U.S. lawmakers might be examining it a little bit more closely in the near future. Shane, Dixon, Kavanaugh, thank you so much for your excellent reporting on this.
Well, thanks for having me on.